It's 8:24 now. Good morning if you've just joined us. You're watching Breakfast. Let's have a look at the papers. The historian, broadcaster and writer Tessa Dunlop is here to tell us what's caught her eye. Morning, nice to see you. We're going to talk about Prince Andrew, but not so much the content of the interview this time. Yeah. The setting.
Indeed.
This is in the Observer.
And actually has been picked up in a number of papers. It was in the South Drawing Room in Buckingham Palace. And for those of you who don't know your way around the palace or who haven't been invited in for tea recently, it was in fact a very significant room. After Queen Victoria's coronation, it was the place where she had held her first ball. And Catherine Bennett in the Observer takes issue with this as the location. Most people, by the way, most papers have seen this as a big scoop for the BBC for Newsnight. And she said, actually, there are questions that need to be asked here. Why this setting? She writes, what excuse is given for this reverential setup for burnishing this pitiful misogynistic nonsense with an audience in a massive gilded chamber, like a scene discarded from the King's speech for looking too comically servile. So she's taken issue with it being on Andrew's home turf. And of course, at the end says, you know, what about Epstein's victims? When are they, you know, question being, when are they going to be given a gilded chamber in which to air their views?
It added to it, didn't it, the juxtaposition of that setting and the content of the interview. It was just
weirdly,
surreal.
I mean, some have said what's better than being under the sort of harsh journalistic lights in a dodgy TV studio. But on the other hand, I don't think it did him any favours, because this sort of backdrop of entitlement and opulence, which he then weirdly highlighted by saying, oh, but I was used to people wandering around, because we have servants wandering around all the time in Buckingham Palace. Anyway, so she doesn't hold back, thoroughly unimpressed. That tends to be the main focus. Just quickly, the whole sweating thing has, of course, got the tabloids excited. No sweat, as at Pizza Express. This is his pushback at the accusation he was
sweating in a nightclub.
Profusely sweating. It is actually a medical condition. Anhydrosis that you can get from trauma, to not be able to sweat, which can
it's
apparently...
linked to adrenaline, isn't it?
Yeah, which
is what he said, isn't it, actually, in fairness. But then there's, what is it, hyperhidrosis, which is the opposite, where you just sweat like that. And
apparently you can reverse anhydrosis with some psychological help. So there we are, for those of you who may no longer be able to sweat. I want to move on. We're talking a lot about the weather. We've just seen scenes from Croatia and Venice. It is everywhere. It's global, of course, tied to climate change. And this is leading to pressure on a lot of big arts institutions, which have come under recent scrutiny because of their connection with BP sponsorship. I didn't realise, this is in the Sunday Times today. There's now a new Troy blockbuster exhibition about to open at the British Museum, funded by BP. You'll remember that recently the Royal Shakespeare Company has reneged on that financial deal. They've dropped it. So too, I think National Galleries of Scotland have ended their links. BP agreed a 5-year deal worth, wait for it, a staggering £7.5 million with these big arts organisations. It's due to come to an end in 2022, and of course there's questions as to whether that will be renewed. Climate change is a nightmare, and we desperately need leadership on it. It's going to unpick all our lives very shortly, and it already is in many respects. But I can't help wondering whether this isn't worse for the arts organisations than it is for BP, who just quietly carry on. With their work with petroleum, etc.
Well, what it does show is a sort of victory for grassroots movements and protests, that they've forced this into the mainstream. It's at the forefront of the political campaigns at the moment, and it's impacting every area of life.
I agree, Nina, that they've got the headlines, but have we seen any change without leadership? I just bought a flight for a job. It cost me less than £30 to fly to Romania next month. That's less than the train to Luton. You know, unless actually we are forced to examine our behaviour and funding is applied differently, the climate's going to continue to be in crisis, whether we pull the funding from arts institutions or not.
Now, in the BBC canteen here, I think I am the only person. They always get the card machine.
I just patronise that canteen, by the way.
Oh, have you? That's fine. I'm the only person who pays cash in there. They look surprised when I take my coins out.
Is it so you can put it all on your spreadsheet at home?
This
is the last hour, we should say, that you admitted to checking over all your insurance claims in minute detail.
Maybe it just makes me look like
now
a miser.
Now you're counting your pennies.
I'm just a miser. I'm just a miser. And yeah, everyone pays on their phones. They pay on their...
Do you not pay on your phone?
Contactless
Get your
cards.
thumb out.
No.
Roger, how old are you? Now, the reason I ask about age,
I just don't want a phone company having all my card details. But anyway, carry on.
Julie Birchill. By the way, I wondered where she went. She was a sort of young, radical, trendy. Well, now she's over 60 and she's washed up in the Telegraph. That's where I found her this morning. Pretty grumpy. On behalf of the elderly, she now considers herself one of them. Roger, I think we can get you in there too, because she reckons that, you know, this cash-free world is really hard for people over a certain age. Because, you know, they're a generation that's grown up with hard cash and we've all moved on to sort of this virtual world of click, ping, press. And the point is highlighted by the ATMs, those cash machines, closing at a rate, and this is staggering, closing at a rate of 578 a month.
Oh, goodness.
I got to say, I do run around, I pay my childminder in cash, and I'm always cycling around trying to find one that doesn't charge me. Because that's the other thing. If you're using cash, increasingly they're charging. But finally, on the train last night, the buffet announced that it would be cash only because their machine had broken.
Crisis.
We starved.
Oh my
I mean,
God.
we were thirsty and hungry. No wonder I was in the canteen.
First world problems.
Yeah.
Seriously.
There's some good news for you. There's a cash point about 50 yards outside the door when you're heading to the station.
I've had my breakfast, but finally, I'm not just worried about the elderly, but beggars, people who rely on tips. Last night, getting out of my taxi, I'm like, there was just some copper shekels in my wallet.
Yeah. And people who are paid cash in hand who don't necessarily even have a bank account are excluded, aren't they? So thank you. It's lovely to see you.
Thanks, Tessa. Thank you very much.